Being an amazing product marketing leader doesn't happen by chance. It happens by habit. Product marketing certified leadership has been built on the back of decades worth of experience from some of the world's best known brands with one goal in mind: helping you be the best leader you can be. Crammed with real life case studies, over 12 hours worth of content, templates, exams, and more, this course is everything you need to lead with authority, confidence, influence, and innovation. Every piece of material within the 7 modules and 29 chapters has been vetted, tested, and approved by senior level product marketers from companies like Amazon, Uber, and HubSpot, serving up game-changing insights throughout. By the time you've wrapped up the final module, you'll be able to define what it takes to be a great product marketing leader, build and scale your team, understand how to successfully manage your existing team, use methods for leveraging data, know how to become the voice of the customer, understand how teams work cross-functionally, and improve your strategic thinking. The beauty of the course is you'll have the freedom to work your way through the modules at a pace to suit you. It's 100% self-paced. You'll even get lifetime access to the curriculum, paving the way for refresher sessions forevermore. Visit productmarketingalliance.com to get leadership certified and spearhead your journey to the top.
Hi, I'm Juan, and I'm really happy to have you here at my talk during the PMA Festival in APAC. My day-to-day, I'm a product marketing manager in TikTok, but today I'm here to talk to you about why your product market fit is not with your average customer. I'm extremely honored to have been asked to speak among all of these amazing PMMs and people from the industry, and I'm really humbled to be here and talk to you. Personally, I have more than 6 years experience within tech and digital advertising, and the last year I've spent working really hard on making sure that TikTok's lead generation solution is the best lead generation solution for advertisers to find their new customers. I hope you have a really nice cup of coffee or tea in your hand. Otherwise, you can pause right now and go make yourself some and sit down really comfortably because we're about to get started on my talk. Thank you. Growing up, I felt completely average, which is great if you're from Sweden like me. In the Nordics, being average is celebrated. We have something that we call the Law of Jante, which is deeply rooted into our culture. The Law of Jante tells you that you need to be completely just like anyone else. If you stand out or if you're doing something different, that's looked down upon and is frowned upon by society in general. If there was such a thing as a Swedish dream, in fact, the Swedish dream would be not to be successful, rich or famous, but it would be to have a villa, Volvo and vovve. Well, in English that would translate to a house, a Volvo and a dog. It's perfect life in perfect Swedish suburbia. When I was writing this speech, I realized that I'm exactly the average height of a Swedish man, 179.73 millimeters. And my name, Johan, was the most popular name among boys, not only the year I was born, but throughout the whole decade of the 80s. Coming out of my mother's womb, I had nothing that made me special. I was perfectly set up for an average, happy Swedish life. I should have been so happy, you know. However, I wasn't. So maybe this feeling of always being average is what has set me on the path to researching why average is actually not a good measurement. In this talk, I'm going to give 3 examples of why looking for the average is a poor decision. I will talk about hotels, pilots, and the deception of sample sizes. But don't worry, I will also talk about how to not make the mistake of solving a problem defined by the average. And I hope that my solution will help you to better define your product market fit, come up with personas, do market sizing, and competitive analysis. So stay with me, because first of all, we're going to talk about how to measure coastlines. Let's say your manager tasks you with measuring all the coastlines of all the countries in Asia in order to figure out what's the average length of the coastline and to be able to benchmark that coastline against your own country's coastline. Now, it's maybe not the most straightforward inbound task, but bear with me a bit. Instead of just Googling, you set out on a very diligent path to measure it yourself. Now, you're about to experience what is called the Coastline Paradox. The Coastline Paradox tells us that the measured length of the coastline depends on the method used to measure it. Now, why is that? It's because land exists at every scale. If you're in space looking down on Earth, you will still see a very clear coastline delineating the sea from Australia, for example. But you can also sit on the beach in Australia and you'll perfectly see where the coastline, where the land meets the sea there. So you can see it from space, you can see it when sitting on the beach. And if you think about it, if you go up to a tiny, tiny stone, you can even see where the water touches the stone there. And you can see that it has all these tiny crevices that if you need to measure the exact coastline, you need to go into each and every one of these little crevices to actually measure how long the distance is. So now, what does that have to do with anything? Well, just like the length of a coastline will differ depending on how you measure it, so will, when we benchmark towards our industry peers, differ depending on how we define our peer set and how little or much competitive advantage we put in there. So let's say your inbound request was something a bit more straightforward. You're working in a hotel and you're launching a 4-star hotel in London in the city center. Now you're tasked with coming up with how we should be pricing this hotel room. I'm choosing the hotel business because there's an amazing database out there where everyone can access numbers from the industry, namely Booking.com. So let's look at the granularity of measurements that we would be okay with for setting a benchmark for the pricing of our new hotel. Now, Booking.com has about 325,000 listings worldwide. If we look for a hotel in London, we have about 1,483 listings for the specific weekend that I was looking into. Your hotel has a 4-star rating, we're down to 444 listings, and is less than 3 kilometers away from the city center. Now we only have 54 listings left. However, your hotel has some compelling features that we know that people are willing to pay premium for. For example, you have a fitness center. We're down to 56 listings. It offers free breakfast, 23 listings. And to top it all off, we also have an airport shuttle that takes travelers from the airport to the hotel and back for free. There's only 3 other hotels in all of London that fulfills all of these criteria. 2 of them are priced at more than £260 per night. One of them is priced at £160 per night. If we were to take an average of that, we would end up at £226 per night. However, we know that there's 2 groupings and none of them is actually priced at this middle price point. We know for a fact that the average would be completely wrong. Your average competitor does not exist, and if you set up an industry benchmark to compare yourself with, it's very likely going to lead you in the wrong direction. You might have heard of Lieutenant Gilbert Daniels. Todd Rose talks about him in his fantastic TED Talk and in his book, The End of Average. Now, Lieutenant Gilbert Daniels was a young Harvard graduate who in the 1950s was tasked by the US Air Force to find the average size of a US fighter pilot. They wanted to find out the average size of a US fighter pilot because they needed to design new cockpits for the pilots. Daniels took the measurement of over 4,063 pilots, but his conclusion was not what the Air Force had wanted it to be. He actually failed in his rather simple mission to find the average pilot. Instead, he went on to prove that there was no such thing as an average fighter pilot. No person was average on all the 10 measurements that Daniels had taken. In fact, even when looking at only 3 measurements, such as height, chest size, or weight, only 3.5% of fighter pilots were average on all 3 of these measurements. Daniels had run into what we today call the average user fallacy. The fact that whenever we add up averages, we end up removing from the total, not adding to the total. If you design a cockpit for the average fighter pilot, you would end up designing it for no one. So just like the average pilot, your average hotel, or your average competitor, your average user simply does not exist. If you're finding yourself taking the averages of multiple measurements when you're building a persona, go back to your data set and apply all those filters and to actually see how many of the users does fit in with this average user that you're building for. The Air Force eventually solved their problem by forcing their contractors to design a seat that would be adjustable for the pilots. Very much like we're adjusting our seats when we sit down in a car to go for a ride today. The last paradox I'm going to talk about is called Simpson's paradox. Edward H. Simpson described this paradox in a paper in 1951. The paradox that Simpson described is the fact that the average of the full sample may be different from the average of individual group samples. If you haven't divided your data the right way, it might end up telling you lies, which is paradoxical because for many we believe that the bigger sample size you have, the better your data should be. Let me give you an example. You may run a survey asking potential customers what they think about your new product. You then divide them into groups of favorable and non-favorable. And based on the data below, you might conclude, our survey showed us that men are more likely to be favorable than women to our product. And you go on creating a marketing and a go-to-market plan that targets men. Since I've already told you that this is a paradox, you probably already understood by now that you would be wrong by doing so. What we've missed here is the individual size of the different samples of the data. Let's slice and dice the data a bit, just like we would when we were creating a persona. If you were to divide the respondents into age groups, we can see a different picture emerging. In 4 out of 6 age groups, except for the 25 to 34-year-olds and 45 to 54-year-olds, women were more favorable to your product than men. In fact, those who were most favorable to your product were girls in the age group of 13 to 17 and 18 to 24, young women. So if you were to position your product towards an average of the total population, you'd potentially miss out on the most valuable categories of your buyers. Now, why is this? It's because we failed to understand the sample sizes of the age categories. The negative women in the age group of 25 to 34 skewed the overall results in the survey to be unfavorable for women, and potentially the products you have at hand will find its audience among the younger girls. At the very least, an insight like this should warrant more research into the interesting age groups. So what I've told you so far is that your average competitor does not exist, so don't benchmark towards them. And I've told you that your average customer does not exist, so don't build products for them. And I've also told you that unless you know exactly how to slice and dice your data, the averages might be lying to you. So at this point in time, you might be wondering, what should we be doing? So what I'm proposing is to start from within. Instead of starting with a benchmark of a competitor or asking your customers on average what is it that they want to achieve, you should start from what is it that you want to build. An average runner might say that they would be very happy running a marathon in 4 hours. But does that mean that a running company or a shoe company should build a shoe for a 4-hour marathon? No, I think an amazing example of this is Nike, who set out to build a shoe that could break the barrier of a sub 2-hour marathon. This also takes us to the second point. Find your extremes. So what are the 2 extreme metrics that will answer the product market fit? Or rephrased from within, where are you trying to fit your product in the market? If we take, for example, the design of a shoe, it might be the metrics distance and speed. When I worked on launching lead generation ads for TikTok, the two metrics that I looked at was the need for technological integration versus the need for a lot of leads. The metrics you come up with here is completely up to yourself, but let's focus on the shoe. Third step is to set up a matrix. So with the two extremes, you now have 4 squares based on the key features of the problems you're trying to solve. Keeping this matrix in mind as you go will help serve as a map. It'll be a guide for a lot of things that you're trying to achieve. For example, you can zoom in into only one of the quadrants, map all of your competitors' products in there, and you can see where's a valuable gap in the market. You can also map out the industries you're trying to pitch to. You can see who is more or less likely to buy according to your current product functionalities. The quadrant can also help you prioritize features you should build, and it allows you to understand the market size and the value of it by helping you focusing your analysis on the right segment right away. And remember, you can always come back and keep pushing those extremes. So the key takeaways from my speech today is stop benchmarking yourself on made-up average metrics based on an average competitors to sell to an average users. None of those exist. If you find yourself with a pivot table of user data, trying to find out who your users are, and if you stubbornly still want to use averages, always go back to your data set, apply all the filters, and count how many users actually fit all of the criteria that you've set. If you're marketing or designing for the average user, you're most likely marketing or designing for no one. Last but not least, when talking to you today about averages, what I've realized along the journey of this speech is that being an absolutely average Swede with an average name, an average hair color, an average height, I'm actually very, very unique. And if you've gotten nothing else out of this talk, you can at least be happy that you've been part of the journey of a man finding his very own unique value proposition. And for that, I thank you.